Welcome to True Crime Paranormal. I'm your host, Josh Turner. This is TCP. Join us in the true crime reality. So if you were with us on the last episode, we were talking about Samuel Little, and we're going to conclude it and continue talk about some of the cases and some other things. We got into some real stuff on the last one. Here, what I got to tell you though, we here at TCP are not just TCP, we are also PRT, and that stands for Paranormal Roundtable. What I can tell you about Paranormal Roundtable is we are a channel that deals with the mysterious, the unknown, the strange, the unusual. We talk about cryptids, we talk about ghosts, we talk about alien abduction, we talk about alternate realities, and we go really deep. We go hard in the paint on some of these subjects, and we don't shy away. We pretty much take things head on. And that's what we pride ourselves on that channel. We start the week off. I guess if you want to start the work week, we'll start on Monday. And Monday is the open lines. We basically, it's just you put the link out there. If you have a story to tell, jump on and tell it. And it's paranormal for the most part, because I believe all of those subjects are all paranormal. It's all connected. And if you have a strange story to tell, you can come on and tell it. And then on Tuesday, it's for the Patreon members. Patreon is $10, $20, $30, $40, $50 tier. Each tier gives you a bigger, better crate, merch crate, which is what we call a swag bag. And after 2 months, you get a swag bag depending on your tier. And then after that, every 6 months, you will get another merch crate consisting of hoodies, shirts, hats, books, you name it. I have a couple books, and those books you can get autographed on the $40 and $50 tier. You get one of my books on the $40 tier, $50 tier. You get both of them, Werewolves and the Dogman Phenomena and the Bigfoot Phenomena. And so I will be autographing those books. So check it out. We have a bunch of different books we give away too, of different authors. And yeah. On Wednesday, we retell people's encounters, and that is at 8 o'clock. The Patreon starts at between 7 and 8 o'clock, depends on what we got going on. And then on Monday, the same thing, 8 o'clock. And then Thursday is the members only. That is for YouTube members. It's a $5, and then you get an extra show a week. Sometimes it's a pre-record, sometimes it's a live stream, and it alternates. And then on Friday, we always have a guest every Friday. And it's a pre-recorded episode, starts at 7 o'clock, goes from 7 to 8. And then on Saturday, it's this channel, True Crime Paranormal. It's reserved for True Crime Paranormal. And on Sunday, that is our flagship show, and we retell people's encounters every Sunday at 8 o'clock, but we're always late, I'll be honest. Just, we're usually there by 8:20, right? And it's always Anthony's fault. Unless Tony's there, and it's Tony's fault. It's not my fault. I don't do any of these things. I don't do nothing. I want nothing. I'm kidding. Anyways, that's what we got going on. Now, besides that, though, my wife has a project that she does, and it's a channel called Dead Zone Transmissions, and it is 5 to 10 minute long episodes, and she's now doing animations for it. She's amazing. We didn't even know she was doing it, and she had already made like 2 episodes, and she's like, hey, I did a thing. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. And now she has a channel. And so she had another channel called Random Files, and now we're using that to do non-paranormal stuff. It's like the economics, history, science, you name it. We talk about geopolitics, whatever. And then that's on YouTube. But then we have another one on Rumble called The Real Random Files, where we talk about a lot of controversial things and conspiracies and all kinds of stuff. And that is on Rumble. Go check that out. So like and subscribe to all of our channels, please. Like and subscribe. We're on Spotify and every platform there is, pretty much, on Paranormal Roundtable. But we aren't going to be for much longer. We're actually going to only be on Spotify, I think Apple, and then we're going to be on YouTube. So, and then Rumble. So those are the main platforms. And then there's one other, I can't remember off the top of my head, but so we're going to only be on like 5 platforms pretty soon, because those are the ones that are actually helping us, and we're going to help them. So there you go. That's it. That's what's happening. So join us in the real reality, Paranormal Roundtable. And I am the host of that too, Josh Turner. And with me tonight is Anthony, and he's the host of Paranormal Roundtable. Madeline stops in every now and then and says a few words and then runs out real quick.
Hey, I blink at the camera too, okay? Give me credit.
And then every once in a blue moon, Rain, he'll do a project with us over there. She'll jump on, and she's been on the Monday show, and she also helped us with the Gypsy Rain case, which is really was the birth of True Crime Paranormal, because when we did that case together, and we did that 3 episodes along with Blondes and Booze and Bigfoot Michigan Rob, it was a 3-parter. We liked it, and we said, "You know what? Rain is really good at what she does," and so I invited her to co-host with us on True Crime Paranormal, and here we are, and a new channel was born. And, I have a co-host also, and she has a lot of her own stuff, for Random Files, and her name is Anna Choate, and so go check her out. She is very, popular on Facebook, always posting things that are controversial and
It's
make
awesome.
making friends wherever. But, we're all kinda cut from the same cloth, so we're all part of the same, club, if you would. So here we are. So let's get started. When we left off, we were all talking, about this guy and what he did, and so we decided, hey, we've kind of laid the groundwork. What? Let's get into some of the cases and how this guy was able to skirt by.
Yes. Well, I thought you had made some very interesting points about your classification of who you thought could have been the attachment with Samuel. And so when I was looking at this case, I thought of it almost like how in nature, how there's parasitic relationships. And I was looking at this thinking he has a symbiotic relationship with an attachment because it seems like the entity was enjoying the unalivings and these crimes just as much as Samuel was. He was proud. He had a sick fetish in doing it and he was enjoying it. This is what got him through to the next day. This was his hobby. This was his sport. This was the whole reason for his existence in his own mind was for him to live another day, to hurt people. And he moved around, he would switch vehicles. So sometimes where there was a few survivors in some instances, they were able to identify what he looked like and the vehicles, but he would switch vehicles. He also had a companion traveler that was a woman that would go around with him for years and they would commit crimes during the day, shoplifting to get by. And then he would go, like you said, with the sunset at night and do these horrible, horrible crimes. When I look at his name, because I've kind of tried to do that with the other cases as well, because I think there's some significance. So if you know who Samuel is in the Bible, it's like a complete mockery of who Samuel Little is today. And so Samuel was asked by God to anoint in oil, with oil, the first 2 kings of Israel. So you have King Saul and King David. And everybody, I'm sure, remembers King David from David and Goliath. But no, I don't know if as many people are familiar with the rest of the history in the Bible of the conflict that happened between David and Saul. Okay, and so it was a power struggle. Once King Saul disobeyed God, then God told Samuel to anoint a young David. He was very young. He went to his home where he was living with his family, and David walked with God and did and what he wanted him to do and trusted in him faithfully. And there was several attempts that King Saul tried to unalive David. And finally he wound up, of course, taking the throne. And so when you look at these unalivings, you almost see a connection with the type of people that Samuel Little was picking, right? He was picking these marginalized women, often prostitutes or on drugs or drinking. And I think the reason why he picked them is because this archon demon wanted him to participate and do these ritualistic killings by sacrificing these women and basically anointing the archons and demons with the blood of these victims. And he wasn't picking victims that were walking with God and faithful. He was picking these women who were promiscuous and doing drugs and prostitution, and they were being sinful. And so he unalived these women's when they were in a stage in their life in living in sin before they had a chance to find their way to Jesus Christ. And so you almost start to wonder, was Samuel Little destined and born to become what he was? Was he just born evil? And in this situation, I think he was.
Yeah, I know one thing upon kind of looking into the subject of people being born evil, how that comes about. It's often an overlapping of three different things, and that has to do with culture, our human fallen nature, and then demonic influence. It's not necessarily one thing. It's basically just, like we've mentioned before on the show, a gradual spiritual decay. And in Samuel Little's case, he had these horrific impulses even at a very young age, but he never did anything to combat them. And it obviously didn't help that he really had an unstable home. Not that that's an excuse, but rather he embraced it. And over time, those violent fantasies, he ended up making them into a reality, cutting short the lives of almost 100 women. And as an old man, when he's finally confessing to all these murders and talking about it, he talks about these impulses as if they're some sort of quirky traits, like almost like he's proud of it. And it's just very sickening. But, I think with people, even who are born evil, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not just a sudden thing or one event that happens. Evil has to be practiced until it becomes normal, which for Samuel Little, it became very normal to him. That's why he was able to talk about these killings as if you talk about a job you once had.
Yes, and I know on the last case when we were speaking about Chris Watts, Nellie had brought up a great point about at conception, there's a spark. And so, what if there is, though, just entering in this just to, play the advocate here, but what if there is this anti matter spark when they're born, when people are born? And so there's actually a gentleman, Daniel Nemes, and he created a device called Energy Vision Camera. And if you haven't ever heard of it, I would suggest you do look it up. Look for yourself. And he was able, with these different lenses, almost similar to how Monty, who we had brought up with the filming of the movie, was catching these faces. And so he, through energy vision camera, is able to catch these interdimensional looking demon like at times energies. And so, one of the ones that really stuck out to me when I saw one of the pictures was he had a leaf, a plant. Okay, we know plants, have their own cells, that are different from human, but they're alive. Okay. And so when he cut the leaf in half and took a picture, that energy didn't just leave right then and there. It was still surrounding where the cutting of the leaf was. So you're still seeing this energy even after it was gone temporarily. That energy is going somewhere. And so, could there be at conception this predestined evil that came into the world through Samuel Little? I don't know, but I do know in the 40s, Melanie Klein was a psychoanalyst, and her main focus was infants. And she made a concept about basically greedy babies, is what she called it. And so she would see and document these cases where there was certain babies who, and it was rare, but it still happened, that when they were breastfeeding, they would be violently, just more milk, more milk. And then they would grow up to be people who always needed more, wanted more. They would push people around. And so the idea is that most people are born innocent and then, like Madeline had touched on, can be corrupted by their parents or the world, outside forces. Some could even say demonic possession or attachments. But there could be 2% or 1% of people that are just born evil.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, I was thinking that there are that's interesting because I do believe that that is probably the case. You can see children, my aunt and uncle for over 30 years ran a daycare, and they sold it a few years ago, and my uncle hated it. He was just like, it's a headache, sometimes having to help, and I think they raised half of my hometown. And, because a lot of my friends went to that daycare and they're like, they remember my aunt and uncle fondly, and I never tell them, hey, my uncle thought you were a psychopath when you were a kid. And because you remember one time, Anthony, he was talking to us about how you could tell which kids were going to grow up to be, and it wasn't always like the kids that had the bad upbringing. Some of these were middle class kids. Some of them came from wealthy families. I know because one of my friends turned out to be a real whatever. His family was wealthy. They owned a lot of land outside of my hometown, nice farmland. And he grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. And before you say, well, he was a spoiled rich kid, no, he had two brothers and a sister who were nothing like him. They're very good people, salt of the earth people. This kid was a couple years younger than me, and he ended up in and out of prison and on drugs. And I believe he's in prison now for like a long, long time. And he was violent. He was aggressive. But why did his two brothers and his sister end up having families and being nice people? I ran into one of his brothers at actually we were at Walmart, and Anthony and I were there, and Anthony was pumping gas and I was inside paying because something was wrong with it or something. And I ran into his brother. And when I got in the vehicle, remember, Anthony, I told you, I said, he's got two brothers. One is like a really great guy. And I'm not going to say their names, but he's like a saint. The other guy, he's a great guy. Like he's paid for people's little league teams or uniforms, whatever. And then he's got a brother who's an absolute piece of dog crap, who I actually have had the pleasure of punching in the face because, yeah, he shoved me down one time. We were in Babe Ruth League. We weren't kids. And we were in batting practice and we got into it. And I said something smart to him and I just was leaning on my bat and I was talking to one of my friends. And he shoved me from behind, and the coach was like, what the heck? So I got up and I knocked the crap out of him. They separated us, and I just kind of waited till we went to the dugout, and then I smacked him. And it was during batting practice. And then he went and told everybody this weird story that he just thought up in his head about how we had bullied him on that team and all this. And I'm like, where is he getting this from? But his mom and dad enabled it. And they were like, oh, y'all were mean to him, blah, blah, blah. His own siblings would tell his parents how evil he was, and they just would not. So it's like not only are they born that way, but then there are people throughout their lives who enable them and protect them. Have you ever seen the movie The Omen? It stars Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck, that's anybody knows. He's a really famous actor. I always liked him. But Gregory Peck in that movie, like he snaps out of it and realizes that Damien is evil. And so he's going to do him in, and then in the end, he's about to do it, and then these police come in, and they shoot him, in a church, right? And then Damien grows up, and then there's other people that protect him. You know, when he was a kid, it was this Rottweiler there was this hellhound basically with this maid that was protecting him, and she was like a witch, and she was basically just completely consumed by the dark side. These are like people, but they have, they're like the elites that we hear about that are just completely consumed with evil and darkness. And so that's what Damien has around him all the time. But I'm not saying this guy I knew when I was a kid was like that, but there are people like, and when he went to the daycare, right? My aunt and uncle, they were like, we knew he was going to be bad. Like they knew. And like my uncle was very, like you could tell, like which ones were going to be which kind of way. You know what I mean? And they became what they thought, like this person's going to be like this, that, you can kind of see it. One kid's going around the playground, picking on other kids and hitting kids. There were kids like that when I was in elementary. It just, you're coming down a slide and they'll hit you. And you're like, why? And it would always shock me. I'd be like, why did you do that? And they just think it's funny and cute and they just enjoy it. There's just something sick about them. These people, they do these things. They have these proclivities. And yeah, you're right. What ends up happening, they grow up and they become evil people. And sometimes they have had broken homes that will contribute to that because, sociopaths are not always become psychopaths, right? Once you're entering into that, whatever, a psychopath, you're basically a killer. But there are people who are literally sociopathic, and they don't always turn into these killers. But then a lot of these people, they live in families where people just go, oh, that's my brother, that's my sister. They never stop and think that this person is born beyond redemption. And there's reasons for that, why I believe that. And we could talk about that on Paranormal Roundtable. But I think that this guy, honestly, when it goes back to what we said about how he was taken in by that snake that he saw unalive that woman in the movie theater. And that set this thing in motion. But he got away with a lot of stuff. I mean, it was like something was watching out for him. Can you explain that to me, ladies?
Yes, so on multiple occasions, he would get caught with a woman he had just unalived. And one time in particular, I believe that he said this was down in Florida. He said he had just finished strangling this woman and she was, her lifeless body was in the passenger seat and a cop pulled up and was like, oh, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing here? And he's pretending to zip up his pants and he's like, oh, hey, officer, me and my wife, we were just through having intercourse. And the officer was kind of like, okay, well, you're not supposed to be here. And he had his light shining on this deceased woman. And right before, and when Samuel Little talks about this, you can hear him getting all giddy, like excited that he got away with it. And he just says, yeah, so, I just kept talking to him and just in the nick of time before he could take a second look at her. And he was like, all right, well, just get out of here. And the fact that happened, to me, it's mind-blowing that happened to him on several occasions. That just, It's like something was just
watching out for him.
Yeah, like you said, just watching out for him.
Yes. I mean, was he born evil and destined to become this mass unaliver? I mean, 93 is like unheard of in the United States. I mean, like Josh said, in some other countries, yes, there's been people to commit more unalivings, but I just I just can't get past this complete mockery to the Bible and God. I think that that really has something to do with it. And there's something puppeteering him that it has watched out for him, that he knew how to pick a certain type of victim. He knew, I mean, sometimes he would get caught, like Madeline had just brought up. A few times he had got pulled up on by police officers, but he was just able to say, oh, a little bit of truth. Oh, I just slept with my wife. It really wasn't his wife, but he did, grape her. And some of the entities, that's what they do. They'll tell a little kernel of truth. And was that what was getting him away all this time? Was there some supernatural, paranormal attachment puppeteering him? in this symbiotic relationship with him. That's kind of what I'm leaning towards. And literally, King Solomon was the son of King David. So it just seems like it's all kind of fitting together. And another case that really stuck out to me was Melinda. They called her Mindy Lepre. Do you remember that one, Madeline?
Yes, I believe she was down in it's either Louisiana or Mississippi. They found her in a cemetery.
And so she was another one that was a prostitute.
Yes, and the interesting thing about that is in his interviews with investigators, they asked him what his preference was with women, and he said he preferred black women. But yet, Mindy Lepre was a white woman who she struggled with addiction. She was prostituting. And when he came across her, it was her and two other prostitutes who were black women. And he pointed to Mindy and said, "No, I want her." And he described her as having like a little bit of a belly when he saw her. And that was because she had just given birth to her son 2 weeks prior. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that he preferred black women, yet he picked her out. And it just so happened that this woman who was obviously had her own struggles had just given birth to a son who would ultimately end up having to grow up without his mother because of Samuel Little.
It was so sad to hear her family. She was loved. They, oh, the father, the brother, the sister, it's just heartbreaking. She was really close with her mother growing up. And when she was really little, her mother was giving birth to the fifth child, and her mom passed away unexpectedly 12 hours after giving birth. So after that, her father was, an ex Marine, and he was like 44, single, widowed, with five kids. He didn't know what to do. And so he was very strict with them. He would beat her, he would hit her in the back of the head. He just seemed like he seemed like he was taking the spankings and the punishment beyond any kind of normal amount with her. And so, from a very young age, at 12, her sister Pat recalls she was already drinking and drugging and dating older boys and sneaking out and going to parties. And she said, her sister said that, and they all remember this about her, which kind of made me identify with her a little bit because I was trying to like put myself in her shoes. And because not everybody wakes up and they're like, oh, when I grow up I'm going to be a prostitute. Like, sometimes these women, that's the only way that they're able to get by. They have no other choice. And maybe there is some women out there that enjoy it, but I mean, I don't think that's very common. And so her sister had mentioned how she taught her to play the guitar, and I love music. I've played the flute for, decades. And she played the flute and picked it up, and she had what we call in the music industry the ear. And so she could hear a tune and then copy that. She had pitch and tuning. She was basically described by her brother as a musical genius. She could play the guitar, piano, and flute. And so it's like, what would her life have been like if she wouldn't have lost her mom at such a young age and had that trauma with the father raising her, to want to move out right away and run away from home, basically, into the arms of her boyfriend at the time. His name was Bill. And her sister recalls the last time she ever spoke to her was Mindy called her and said, "Hey, I have a son. And they were all surprised and they're like, "Oh, congratulations. Come home. Come home. Bring your little baby and come home." But she didn't. I wish she would have, but she didn't. So 2 weeks after giving birth, she was with her two friends on that corner, and for some reason, Samuel Little picked her, took her to the cemetery, unalived her, and about 4 weeks later, the groundkeeper at the cemetery was walking around and smelt something just horrible, just horrible. And when they found her, she was just thrown away like trash in a ditch where they had put the flowers from other people's graves that have died. They threw her on top of all the flowers and she was in full decomposition. And so now her son had to grow up without a mother, just like she did. In this family, just to know that one story about how that one particular family was affected by Sam Little. Imagine all the families of these 93 victims. It's just horrible. And to see him laughing and joking and proud of this, it's sick. I really do think he was born evil and had an attachment and welcomed the evil and didn't try to fight it and just welcomed it.
When you mentioned earlier about just this man's actions just being just a mockery of God, in particular on the last episode when we talked about the way he would strangle his victims and until they were unconscious, let them catch their breath, kind of coming back to life, just to, unalive them again for the final time. If you think about it, God in the Bible, it's described how He breathes life into us, how He breathed life into Adam. So that there alone is just a mockery of that, because it's like He's basically taking the breath of life that God gives us and taking it away. And it's just the way He would allow them to come back just to see the fear in their eyes, just to, do it all over again and to just strike more fear. And just the act of strangulation in general, like the fact that he remembered it with such detail, it shows just how emotionally significant it was for him. Because if you think about it, during intimacy, eye contact's like where you connect with the person. But in this case, it was just so everything about serial killers like Samuel Little, it's just a complete inversion of what God intends for us. That it's just like that eye contact was for something so sickening and evil, because for him, the sexual gratification came from cutting off their breath, taking their lives. And for them, the last thing for them to look into, I can only imagine just how horrifying it had to be looking into his eyes as he was just choking the life out of them. And especially for the ones that he allowed to come back just to do it again for the final time. Like, I can't even fathom just what he must have looked like or what his eyes must have looked like. And for these women, for that to be the last thing that they saw, it just makes my skin crawl, just even thinking about it.
That's so interesting you said that because how I had mentioned previously how some of his victims survived by all odds. Divine intervention, I don't know. Probably. But one of the victims said that he literally said that to her. He said, "Take my breath into you," and kissed her.
Which victim was this? Do you know the name?
Lori Barros. What happened was shortly after the Mindy unaliving, so this is in the 80s. You have one of his trials where he actually was on trial for the unalivings because two women were successfully able to identify the vehicle to the man that attacked them. So you have a woman named Tanya Jackson and you have a woman named Lori Barrows. Lori was one of the only other Caucasian women that he chose as a victim. And so he was acquitted, which was just so mind boggling to me that he was acquitted of this. And really, what it came down to was the jury. So, not to go into too much details of my background, but I have been in federal courts and trials, and I've seen it play out. And I'll tell you right now, if you lie to that jury one time, they're not going to believe anything that you say, even to the detriment of Samuel Little getting out after a short 3-year sentence. And so the pre-trial actually went great. Tanya Jackson went in and Lori Barrows went in, and they were like, great, these are going to be great witnesses. But what happened was when the trial came, they found that Lori Barrows had lied. And so she was not kidnapped. She was a prostitute. And so since she lied about that one little thing, the jury did not believe her. And so he came in and he was like, a matter of factly, I gave her $20 for sex and I don't feel like I got my money's worth. And she tried to attack me. And so the reason why she was strangled is because I was trying to get her off of me. And she had to admit that she was a prostitute and she was doing it to get money for drugs. So then they didn't believe her, find her credible. And Tanya Jackson, I can't imagine anybody doing this. I haven't seen this one yet, but she went in to the court completely drunk and wasted. And so it was like, you know how they say about alcohol and spirit. So it was like, did this oppression she had make her drink before she went in? Because the jury did not buy her story either. And he wound up being acquitted, and he just got basically a slap on the wrist, and he got sentenced for 3 years, but the unalivings were off the table. And the investigator on that particular trial was like, you know what? It was like he was born for this. His hands were abnormally large. He had abnormally large fingers. And when they looked at him, when he looked at him in that courtroom, he just remembers so vividly the scratch marks and scarring you could see from scratches all the way from his chin down his neck. And the lawyer at that trial said, this man is an unaliver. He was red in the face at the end of this trial when he was giving his final statement, the closing argument. He was red in the face and he was like, if you acquit him for this, he'll do this again. And he was right.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, that's like you said, investigators described him as having these large hands. Samuel Little wasn't like some little diminutive man. I mean, to do what he did, you have to have strength. He was described as being around 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, and very stocky, not lean or wiry. He was a very physically imposing man. So naturally, didn't take too much for him to overpower these women who, were prostitutes and oftentimes on drugs. So again, I can only imagine just the fear that they must have felt going through that because, I mean, really, there's little to nothing they could do, especially being isolated with someone like that.
Yeah. Tanya Jackson, she was in the vehicle with him and the police. That was one of the circumstances when the police pulled up. And this police, did his due diligence and didn't buy him because he was acting all suspicious. And he thought he was actually going to have to fight Sam Little, and he was like a big guy. And so the officer was like, "Sir, you don't have to do this." And so Samuel Little put his hands behind his back. I probably because he's so used to doing it and he didn't want any heavy charges. So he put his hands behind his back and let him go in. And when the officer looked in the car and saw her, bloody nose, bloody mouth, because what he had said in the interrogation videos as well is he would sometimes hit them first to try to stun them and then strangle them, then resuscitate them, and then they would be dazed and confused, not knowing what was going on. And then he would continue strangling them again to watch the fear in their eyes. And basically, he would enjoy watching the souls leave these women's bodies. And so when the officer looked in the car that night, he saw Tanya Jackson. He didn't even think that she was going to be alive, but by some miracle, she survived. And then imagine today, she probably has nightmares and just doesn't want to go anywhere. I mean, her whole life has been affected by this man or whatever he is you want to call him.
Yeah, Wolf, you mentioned in the last episode about terrible with the names, a demon that would go after effeminate men. Interestingly enough, some of the victims that Samuel Little came across turned out to be transgender women, which he was unaware of until obviously, things took a step further. And Jillian Lauren, who, interviewed him extensively, had talked about how the transgender victims that he had were the ones that he didn't like talking about. Like all the other women, he just loved going into detail and bragging about it. But it's like those ones in particular, he was just like, oh, yeah, they were what you call, transgender. And he really avoided talking about those victims. So what was the name of that demon that you mentioned?
Orneus.
Orneus.
Or Arius, or, yeah.
Yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting because that he happened to have some that were trans, yet those are the ones he didn't talk about. So it's like you said, there's definitely something puppeteering him or just people like him in general, because the fact that those were the few that he didn't want to go into detail about or avoided talking about. Obviously, I think that was probably the only time he felt shame, I guess you can say, because he didn't seem to have shame in anything else he did, no matter how atrocious.
Marianne was a 18 or 19-year-old transgender black identified as a woman in Miami, Florida. Met him at a bar, gave her a car ride. At that time, he was in a four-door Pontiac, a gold one, and he unalived her in a driveway near a sugarcane field. And then he dragged her 200 yards into the swamp, muddy waters, and they never found her. But through him doing the portraits and the drawings, that's how we kind of have an image of what Marianne looked like. So there's just so many. There's just so many victims. And the FBI, they have a basically a program, the VICAD, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, and they have been able to put this timeline together of his travelings and when he was in, prison, and what unalivings were basically his style of unalivings, and they've been able to really give some peace of mind to a lot of families who've lost members and didn't know what happened to them. They cracked the Odessa case and connected it back to him, which was in Texas. So he's been convicted in California, Texas, and Ohio, finally. But, like we had mentioned, his accomplice was, do you remember her, Madeline? Was it?
Aurelia Dorsey, yes, she was like 30 years older than him. They traveled together, did petty theft, robberies, things like that to survive. But in interviews, he did say, "Oh, she had no idea what I was doing. He just, she just figured he was just out hooking up with girls or hustling or something." Like, it just shows just how he kept that part of his life completely separate from his travel companions. Like, they were just oblivious. Like I said on the last episode, he would just, waltz into their motel room after having just finished unaliving a woman and just, would just chat up like nothing.
I think she knew, and I'll tell you why. So they identified as themselves as boyfriend and girlfriend, but I mean, you have to imagine she's like this 70-year-old woman, and he's like, in his 40s at this time. But they enjoyed each other's companionship, I guess, as much as he could for being the psycho he is. And they, for 13 years, had went around moving and transient, and he was, participating in shoplifting with her. They had actually gotten arrested a couple of times together. And so what do you think she does is she testifies in his favor. And that was just so sickening to me, that she must have had this weird infatuation with him. Maybe he looked at her as a mother figure because she was older. Maybe she looked at him as a son. I mean, they were in the world alone together, and the only thing they had was the road and motels, and they were getting adrenaline rushes off of these crimes they were doing, these shoplifting, events. And so at one time they actually got another companion, and his name was Danny. And so when he did get arrested and he was facing the trial for the two women that I had previously mentioned, Tanya and Lori, Ms. Dorsey doubled down that he was a great guy. She's never seen anything bad out of him, that he would never do anything like this. Danny, however, was kind of chatty. And so he basically said, after the night that one of the unalivings had, because it happened Saturday, they found the body, or she, not the attempted unaliving. It happened on a Saturday, and she had, given the description, they were able to find him and him get arrested at their motel they were staying at. He said that, yeah, he was missing at the time that that crime happened, and that when the car got back to the motel, that it smelled horrible because during the strangulation, the woman had defecated in the car, and Miss Dorsey cleaned it up. And so, right before that trial, Danny went missing. He was never able to testify, but Miss Dorsey showed up to the trial with a Bible in her hand and a church like outfit with a hat. And she was such a good witness that they weren't even able to poke any holes in her story at all. She had come off as this innocent, grandma like churchgoer to the jury. And the other two women who, in pretrial, they thought they had a strong case. The jury didn't buy their story at all. So it's just like these unseen spiritual warfare forces have been behind this man's 35-year unaliving spree.
Wow, 35 years. That's crazy.
Yes. And, and you would think, I remember when I was younger and I was learning about, your parents teach you, oh, don't go accept candy from strangers, don't get in strangers' vehicles, and they taught you from a young age as a kid, about kidnappers and kids go missing and Amber Alerts and people can hurt you. And I thought, oh, geez, we got cell phones now. So isn't that great? I can't imagine there's any serial killers now with cell phones. But that's not true, is it? That's not true, is it? It seems like there's more serial killers now, even with all our technology, than there's ever been before. And so all these women with this sick society, in my opinion, dating apps, how dangerous. How dangerous. You meet a guy on Tinder or whatever Bumble it is, and then you go out and meet a stranger. You don't know if he could be a Samuel Little who's coming off charismatic and charming. You don't know who you're meeting. You just swipe left or right or whatever it is, and you're going out with complete strangers. It's just mind-boggling to me. Before people, when they would date, you'd meet somebody in the grocery store and you could kind of, women have their intuition and you could kind of feel somebody out and discern if they're, a weirdo or not. But now you're just going on a dating app and maybe even getting catfish because sometimes people put pictures on there that they don't even look like. And you're going out and meeting possibly dangerous unalivers.
Yeah, there are these people too that have these relationships with people online, and they don't even know if they're real people. I mean, it's just it's crazy, and they'll have these relationships, and they'll message back and forth, and it's like, dude, I don't understand it.
Yeah, it's definitely changed nowadays. But one thing that survivors in hindsight kind of noticed with red flags was just a lot of subtle boundary testing with a little, and obviously this is something predators exploit, like standing too close or just like, not understanding no means no or I'm good, kind of just seeing how far they like, can go. And I think for women especially, we have this, it's kind of ingrained in us where it's like, well, I don't want to be rude. It's better to come off rude and stay alive than to try to be polite and then you end up missing. So I think that's just something, just don't ignore your gut. It's, that feeling is not something you need to just play off as well. It's all in my head. It's just better to be safe and just, especially if you're coming across someone, even if you're with online dating, like you don't know who you could be talking to. And I think it's important to meet people in public, but, anyone who's quick to try and get you alone somewhere, that should automatically be a red flag. And chemistry in general, that's something that takes time. It's not going to happen instantaneously when you meet someone, contrary to what the movies might tell us. It's a little more complex than that. So, and those are things that predators exploit. And again, but this is more prominent with women, it's just the whole, well, I just don't want to be rude, or then trying to make you feel guilty about setting boundaries, like, oh, I'm just trying to be nice, or oh, come on, like, really, do you think I would? Like, yep, nope, I'm good. So I guess my whole thing with that little spiel is just don't ignore your gut. And like I said, it's better to come off rude and standoffish and stay alive than, to just ignore those signs and not set boundaries and then something happens.
Yeah, I mean, those poor kids, the college students, uh, that were in the house just a couple of years ago, they were unalived by Brian Kohlberger. And his trial, has been going on now. And that's a case I'd like to dig into all of us one day, but he thought he was going to get away with it, basically. And several women have come out and said, "Oh my gosh, I went out on a date with that guy from an online dating site." And so you just don't know. You don't know people. It really takes a long time to get to know a person. It really does. I just think, we should anybody listening to this, just keep this story in mind of this Samuel Little who went under the radar all these years, and you just don't know who could be the next Samuel Little that you're potentially meeting or going out with.
Yeah, I forget who it was. Was it Ted Bundy or the Green River Killer who had a friend who that they worked with at this radio station? It was a female friend, and she was like best friends with him, and she had no clue like anything about who he really was, and they were friends for years. And she said he never was threatening with her. He never frightened her. Nothing. You really don't know people. I mean, look at Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. You know, he was
Police
a
officer.
pillar, yeah, and a pillar of his community, family man, this and that, and he got away with it for a long time, for years.
It's a very haunting thought. Yeah. I mean, Samuel Little's sister's boyfriend, when they went to and interviewed him, he was like, "Ah, Sammy." He's like, "Ah, he couldn't even believe it." And he was like, buy him a bag of pistachios and he'll tell you anything." Like, people couldn't believe it with him either. And it's just so crazy to me. And one of the victims who survived said when she was in the back of the car, she knew she was a prostitute. She knew what she was doing. And she said he just started strangling her out of nowhere. Like, he just, in an instant, it went from the charismatic person she met that picked her up to who he really was, that evil monster. And she said she didn't know if that was like a kinky thing, and so she kind of tried to pretend like she wasn't scared. But then once she realized that what he was doing and that he was really going to unalive her, she prayed in her head and she said, "God, I can't be mad at you because I put myself in this situation." But by some reason or another, she was one of the people to survive Samuel Little.
Well, thank goodness there were some people that survived and made it out. I think, in conclusion with this guy, it's funny because, not funny, haha, but funny, strange, weird, that this demon that we were talking about, Ornius, I think he's, it talks about his proclivities, his penchant for effeminate boys, kind of reminds me of Gacy too.
Yeah.
It does. It kind of gives you the strangulation thing. I think he's a prominent figure in a lot of these. I think him and his legions. And the fact that he can be male or female is weird. Like, that's just it's a weird thing, And I think we like to think of things in terms of, like, well, at least us here, because we are normal people. We like to think of things in terms of like male and female. I do believe that there are two genders. I'm not one of those people that thinks, or whatever. And I think that that's correct. I think, and I'm not bashing anybody who has their own whatever, but I don't agree. I think that men and women are made to be together. I think that's kind of, a lot of people will chafe and not like that I say that, and not necessarily people that are that way, but somebody who, well, I got a brother, sister, cousin, whatever that does that, whatever. And that's fine if you do, but I think we were made a certain way for a reason. I do. And but these demons, these archons, they tend to be switch hitters. You know what I mean? And they kind of play the role of whatever it is that they need to play to achieve whatever objective they need to achieve. And I think that we would be men that you need to be careful because women do this too. Not as often, but I can tell you this. I know men who've been drugged and robbed, and, a woman can seduce a guy into getting unalived by dudes I mean,
Yep.
they honeypot guys all the time. Gangbangers love to do that. That's how a lot of them end
Mhm.
up getting got. It's what they call it in the hood. It's just they get got because a woman, will call them up and be like, "Hey, why don't you come over here?" And then something happens. A guy that they can't catch any other way, they'll catch them like that. And then there are guys who are targeted because, wrong place, wrong time, or they're homosexual, you know. And then there are women who put themselves out there and put themselves at risk prostituting. And that is just, and drugs lead to that. And it's just kind of like a spiral, It starts off with, you know, whether they are abused or maybe they just don't want to follow the rules or whatever the reason is, they go out and they become prostitutes. Most of the women, I would say, are from broken homes. They're abused. And then they become, but there are a few that turn to doing things and then they just don't want to conform. They don't want to follow rules. And there are people who will be like, well, she's possessed of the Jezebel spirit, right? That's the name for it. And there are a few like that, but I think overwhelmingly they're women who were abused and things. And they do end up putting themselves out there at risk. It's just I know years ago when I was working at the club, and I got to say this was a friend of me and my brother's, and she eventually ended up passing away from overdose. She died of drug abuse, but her mother, she had literally she was more of a friend of my brother's, and my brother was always out carousing, bringing people into the house, and I'm like, who are these people? I don't know these people, and he would always be like, hey man, they want to hang out and party, whatever. And I would a lot of times just make sure I had nothing valuable out and just go to my room and just avoid whatever insanity was going on. But there was this one woman that I became friends with, and we were friends for probably almost a decade. And she did meet a tragic end, ultimately dying of a drug overdose. But I knew her before she began prostituting, and you could see it developing in her. And I tried reaching her, but at that time in my life, I couldn't even reach myself. I had my own. My head was, under the water myself most of the time. And I tried to get her help a couple times, and one time she called, and these guys had beat her up, and she didn't know who else to call to help her. And so she had my number, and I just looked down, and I was like, I haven't heard from this person in a long time. And I went and got her, and I helped her, and she just looked terrible. And I did manage to get her into a rehab. And I didn't talk to her for a while after she got out. She disappeared. She moved out of state for a while. And then she came back and she was bad on the drugs again. And everybody probably knows Chief. He's been on the show. He's a friend of ours, has a jiu-jitsu academy, Anthony's former coach. And him and I had given her a ride from downtown one night, to this really rough place. And we were like, are you sure you want to, be dropped off here, whatever? And she was like, yeah, I'm fine, whatever. And the next time I saw her, which was about 5 or 6 days later downtown, because I was running a nightclub, she was all beat up. And so I sat her down and we were talking, and it was after hours. And at this point we were just, we were friends. And me and a couple of the bartenders, one of the female bartenders that knew her very well. And we tried talking to her and telling her, you got to stop because, something bad could happen. And she told us the story, what happened to her. She was nearly killed by a guy that time that we had dropped her off to go to that place where she was, and she started crying. And I remember her breaking down and saying, yeah, this guy, he tried to strangle me and I got away from him, and I managed to run out into the street, but that, and then I guess maybe 6 months later, she died of a drug overdose. So, yeah, it's just a sad thing. It's and my friend, had messaged me and said, hey, she died. And I was like, how? When I first heard she had died, I thought maybe somebody had unalived her because of the, so it was either going to be that or the drugs. And a lot of these women that Samuel Little preyed upon, their minds were messed up over the drugs, and they made bad decisions and they fell into that trap. And, but anyway, she was a friend, and a lot of people looked down on her and they were like, oh man, she's a hoe, this and that, and I just looked at her as a person that needed help. And when I think about that woman in particular and that particular person, it's kind of a barometer for judging yourself. And I kind of thought about it, how I felt pity for her. And a lot of people don't. They don't feel pity for these people. They think, well, they put themselves in that position and that's what happens. Yeah, but what if it was you? And I'm not saying that like okay, most of us aren't going to go out and do this, but what if you're a person in a bad way and you're down on your luck, and a predator comes after you, I mean, are you still going in that final moments? Are you going to be like, thinking, oh, this is what I get, this is what I deserve, like be heartless, with yourself and before you put it on someone else, because every one of these people was a human being. Every one of these people had people that loved them and cared about them in some way. They touched someone's lives. My friend, who passed away, her mother was abusive and mean to her and had turned her out into the streets when she was real young and had let boyfriends and men and people do things to her. And she told me this one night, when we were sitting there talking. And I had gone to eat dinner with her one night, after she had, partying, whatever. She had gotten out of jail. And I was a true friend, and a few of us were her friend, and despite all of our flaws back then, and I didn't look at it, and other people would look at this woman and you could look at her and tell that she was a lady of the night, and people were giving me these sideways glances, like I'm over there, either like I'm a John or I'm her pimp or I'm just some stupid sucker who's buying her dinner. I'm just a person who doesn't care what people think. And to me, she was a human being. And it's a tragedy. It's a sad thing. And I tried to reach her and other people did too. But in the end, maybe it was her upbringing, maybe it was whatever. She wasn't a bad person at heart. You know what I mean? And a lot of people will judge her just based on whatever. And I had an aunt who was a drug abuser and who did a lot of stuff. And I watched her get smacked around when I was young by a guy who eventually did kind of act as her pimp and did horrible things. And we eventually got into it. But how do you reach these people? It's very hard. And I think of like Mary Magdalene. Jesus loved her and he cared for her. And I always use Jesus as my guide. And if you want the barometer of what kind of moral code you have, take the least of the people in our society and how do you treat them? Even though the homeless people, and you know this, Anthony and Maddie, you work for the security, we have people that cause a lot of grief for us. They cause a lot of problems for us, but I still won't abuse those people. I refuse to abuse them. If they abuse me, I'm going to defend myself or do whatever I got to do. But and there are some that are extremely violent and extremely unwell. There's no doubt about that. But I'll never go out of my way to abuse these people. And so someone like Samuel Little, I mean, I'm a large guy myself. I'm like 6'3", well over 350 pounds. And this guy, he's just I have a lot of physical ability to do whatever. And somebody like this guy, it's just, he lived by the grace of God that nobody took him out. And it's too bad that he did, in my opinion, because even just dying is not good enough. And I live with the thought that he is going to be punished severely in the afterlife for what he's done to these people. For the women and I guess the man that he killed. But it's just and the women and men he killed. It's sick that this guy got away with so much for so long. And then he brags about it like he's so proud of himself, of what he did. And there are a lot of people out there running around doing this kind of stuff. And it's just crazy to me. That just, destroying lives like it's nothing. But that's where we're at. And just always remember, these people, downtrodden people of society, they were living beings too. They had hopes and dreams at one time. They were children at one time, and they had children themselves. They had parents. They had people that cared about them. Nobody should have to go through that. Nobody. But I think as a society, we've gotten so far into the not caring, it's just sad that these people, they act like they're nobody. That this is just, it was just a homeless, it was just a prostitute, it was a drug addict, whatever. They're still people, and you should treat everybody the same. Treat a king the same as you do a pauper. I mean, how would you like to be treated? Anyways, that's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank my co-hosts for being here tonight, Madeline, Rain, and of course, what was your name again, sir?
Bubblicious Fisheye.
Bubblicious Fisheye.
Yeah, he looks like a Bubblicious Fisheye.
Bubblicious Fisheye over here. But anyways, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you to the audience. Without you, we wouldn't even have a show. We'd just be sitting here talking. But thank you to everybody who listens. And thank you to the paratroopers coming over, Paranormal Roundtable, to support us on this project. And we'll see you next week. Good night.
Dark deeds, footsteps in the weeds, a body not breathing, what overtook them? I hear the voices crying from the other side, the pain whispered like a slow tide. Was it impulse or rehearsal? Did they snap or was it normal? What was done in the dark will be brought to the light. A murder at midnight. Never gave up the fight, but in the end it went toward the light. A mile mark, a sign, a midnight crime, a quiet grave, a life taken away. Was it impulse or rehearsal? Did they snap or was it no? Captured and tried, a criminal mind, thinking the body's no one to find. The darkness of a serial killer's mind as the gavel comes down. Guilty that you're found. Was it impulse or rehearsal? Did they snap or was it normal? Was it the voices in my head? Was it the echoes of voices? Was it isolation or a sick infatuation? Was it the monsters that visited the bed? What was it they said? Was it impulse or rehearsal? Did they snap or was it normal? Each one different but always the same. A monster and a game. Was it the thrill of watching life slip away? Or was it cowardice? Was it improv? So rehearsal? Did they snap? Or was it not?